Hi, world historians. This is your first notes video for Unit 1 on the Enlightenment. So we are going to today talk about forms of government because it's really important to understand the different ways that governments can be organized in order to understand the context of the Enlightenment and why it happened. So at the end of the video, after completing these notes, you will have two questions that you should answer. The first one is to define absolute rule and the divine right of kings. And then number two, you will explain the differences between an absolute monarchy and other forms of government. So, as I said, it is important to look at the government that was happening leading up to the Enlightenment, because that will help us understand how and why the Enlightenment started. So, right now, if you're thinking about our historical thinking skills, we are contextualizing, right? We're looking at the background information, the how and why, to figure out what caused the Enlightenment. So, the government of the Enlightenment itself, let's start there. It was a monarchy, okay? And a monarchy is a government that is led by a king or queen, and this person gains power through his or her family, meaning that they are born into that position. Their power is what we call inherited. So there are no elections, right? It is the king, and then they have a son. Let's say when the king dies, the son, for example, would take over. So it is inherited. Okay, so that is a monarchy. Now, specifically during the Enlightenment, it is an absolute monarchy. An absolute monarchy is a government where the king or queen, right, because it's a monarchy, rules the country without laws controlling their actions. This is called absolute power or absolute rule. Now, let me be clear. There are laws. The people have to follow the laws. However, they do not apply to the kings and queens. So maybe you might be thinking about how that could potentially be a problem, right? If the laws don't apply to you, why would you follow them, right? If there are no consequences, why would you follow them? So you can maybe see how people were getting upset about absolute monarchy and absolute power during this time period. Now, how did these kings and queens get their power, or where did they believe this power, this absolute total power, came from? Yes, their power was inherited, but more than that, they also believed in something called the divine right of kings. And this was the belief that kings received their power and their right to rule from God. So divine means holy. So they believe that their power came from God, right? And we talked about already how the church had a lot of say during this time period. So our kings and queens are really getting their power from the church. So it's important to compare this type of absolute monarchy to other forms of government. So how does this compare to a democracy, for example? A democracy is a government where supreme or all of the power belongs to the people that are being governed. So instead of the king or queen having that power, the people have the power. The people are the source of the government's power. Now, democracy can be considered or split into two different types. And the first is a representative democracy. And this is where people vote for leaders who then make and vote on laws for the people. This is also called a republic or an indirect democracy. We believe that by electing people to represent us, that the laws that they make will be what we want, right? We trust the people that we elect to make laws that benefit us. The United States has this type of representative democracy, and we have a presidential representative democracy, right? We elect a president, we elect representatives. Now, democracy can also be a direct democracy, and that is where people vote directly on each and every law, not the leaders. So instead of us electing someone to make the laws for us, we would vote directly. Every single person would vote on each law, not the leaders. Okay? We do not have this type of democracy. If you're thinking of an example, Greece in ancient times would be a direct democracy. And then how does this compare to a dictatorship? So a dictatorship is what my students often get confused with absolute monarchy. They are similar, but they're not the same. A dictatorship is a form of government where, yes, one person makes all the decisions. That's where we see some similarities between absolute monarchies and dictatorships, because it's one person, right? A king, a dictator. They're making all the decisions. However, in a dictatorship, usually they are self-appointed, meaning their power is not inherited. They are not born into that position. They often take their power by force. So they use maybe the military or manipulation to take control of a government and then rule that way. We will spend a unit looking at how dictators come to power, how they rule the government, the types, the examples. But for now, think of a dictatorship like North Korea. I think that's going to be your best modern day example. Under Kim Jong-un in North Korea. That is an example of a dictatorship. Okay, and that's it. Like I said, it's important to compare what we had during the Enlightenment or leading up to the Enlightenment and how it compares to the other types of government to see why people might have been upset at the time. So you now have 2 questions to answer in Edpuzzle. One, you are going to define absolute rule and the divine right of kings. Make sure that you answer in complete sentences and that you define both of those concepts. And then number 2 is to explain the differences, compare the government of an absolute monarchy and other forms of government. So tell me what is different about an absolute monarchy to democracy, for example, to a dictatorship. Okay, so answer those 2 questions in Edpuzzle, and then we will debrief as a class. So make sure to pause the video if you need to and go back and fill in any blanks. And let me know if you guys have any questions. But otherwise, I will talk to you guys soon. See you later.